I sat at the kitchen table, the place where Isabella had just finished reviewing her speech. She had been going over it for days, looking for any flaws, but found none. Her notes were thorough, covering all her arguments and anticipating every counter-argument with prepared responses. She seemed convinced that she couldn't lose with this speech. Maybe she wouldn't win, but she was sure she wouldn't fail. I noticed her smile, but when she thought about what she had to lose and realized the risk, it quickly faded. Satisfied with her wording, she shifted her focus to timing. She believed that if she presented it to me slowly, it might appeal to my logical mind, leading to my agreement. But she also knew it would give me time to come up with counter-arguments. After 18 years together, she was well aware that I often had the upper hand in logical debates, so she dismissed the slow approach and decided on shock and awe. Hit me hard and fast, securing my agreement before I could think it through. Was my agreement critical? Absolutely. Without it, nothing would progress. That was the risk-free part. I watched as Isabella nervously stood up and busied herself in the kitchen, trying to distract herself from the pain she was about to inflict on me. She seemed to think I deserved it, but I couldn't understand why. She justified her actions by blaming me for backing her into a corner. So, in her mind, it was my fault. I glanced around the kitchen, trying to remember the last time Isabella had been there alone on a weekday. It had been at least 6 months. Before that, she was always the first to arrive home and welcome the kids back from school. What had changed? Ethan, her new boss, had been transferred from another office 7 months ago. Initially, their relationship was purely professional, but things shifted when he asked her to stay late one day and then treated her to dinner as a thank you. They discovered they had many shared interests, despite him being 8 years younger. Their mutual love for the arts, movies, and fashion deepened their connection. Gradually, his compliments on her work and appearance increased, making her feel flattered but also worried about aging. Their after-hours interactions became regular, evolving from work discussions to casual conversations over coffee. Within a month, they dropped all pretense of work and spent evenings together. Soon, his loneliness and dislike for dining alone led her to skip family dinners to join him at restaurants more frequently. By the 3rd month, their outings included movies and shows, even on weekends. To justify her absence, she claimed there was a potential promotion on the horizon, and she needed to put in extra hours. Though she felt a pang of guilt for this lie, I fully supported her new ambition. Despite knowing it wasn't right for a married woman to act this way, after 17 years of selflessly being a mother, she felt entitled to some time for herself. With Ethan, she felt appreciated in a different way. While my appreciation had become routine, Ethan's attention made her feel valued and new. I took on more responsibilities at home, finding renewed purpose. I voiced concerns about our youngest, only 13, being left alone. When Isabella snapped at me to reduce my hours if I wasn't comfortable, I complied without further complaint. The next day, I left for work early. That evening, I was home early, helping the kids with homework and cooking dinner. With a tremor in her voice, Isabella thanked me for supporting her career. As her weekend work began, I stepped up again, entertaining the kids. Rather than seeing it as a burden, I relished it, reconnecting with the children. Our 17-year-old son even sacrificed time with friends to join me and his siblings on outings. 3 months ago, Isabella's relationship with Ethan had been strictly professional. However, one Saturday after lunch, Ethan suggested booking a hotel room for the afternoon. At first, she laughed it off, thinking it was a joke, but when she realized he was serious, it unsettled her. Hastily, she made excuses and brushed it off, but inwardly she cursed him for jeopardizing their friendship. She knew she wouldn't betray me. The following Monday, Ethan treated her with distant professionalism, leaving Isabella longing for his presence. The absence of their interactions, lunches, and compliments weighed heavily on her, despite her efforts to linger after work. She realized that his recognition of her professional and personal strengths had become crucial to her self-esteem. Though I was attentive and complimentary, it didn't carry the same weight. 2 incidents that week should have been red flags. First, on Wednesday, she returned home to find dinner only half prepared, with me asking her to finish it while I fetched our eldest from soccer practice. When I returned, Isabella remained seated, causing dinner to be delayed. This led to our first confrontation. I questioned the worth of her dedication to work, prompting Isabella to lash out, venting her frustrations from feeling overlooked by Ethan onto me. By bedtime, she had calmed down and denied any issues when I asked if we were okay. However, her distracted demeanor made me feel increasingly rejected by her consistent rebuffs. On Friday afternoon, Ethan approached Isabella to apologize, blaming his behavior on loneliness and being close to an attractive woman. Isabella accepted his apology but made it clear that such advances were unacceptable. Isabella assured me she was committed to our marriage and intended to remain faithful. In response, Ethan had the audacity to ask if any of her colleagues would be willing to help him alleviate his frustration. That triggered a possessive reaction in Isabella, who promptly shut him down. Despite this awkward exchange, they parted amicably, with plans to meet for lunch and a show the next day. The second sign of Isabella's growing obsession came when she returned home that Friday evening. The kids and I were packing for a camping trip, and she seemed genuinely puzzled when she saw us. We had planned this long weekend getaway a month ago and had been discussing it over dinner all week, but she acted like it was news to her. When she suggested rescheduling for the following weekend, I refused, explaining that this was our last chance before winter set in. Frustrated and upset, she stayed home alone while we went on the trip. I didn't realize how deeply this affected her until the next day when she tried to reach us. We were out of cell service range, and she ended up feeling isolated and upset. When we got back, she didn't blame us for not informing her, probably because she feared she might have ignored our reminders. That night she turned down intimacy, saying she needed to be fresh for work. I suggested her ambition was driving a wedge between us, but she snapped back, refocusing on her plans with Ethan. One night before 3 a.m., Isabella woke up, seemingly realizing the harm her actions were causing to our marriage and family. The thought of me leaving and her raising the kids alone clearly scared her. Determined to cool things off with Ethan, she snuggled closer to me for comfort. Though tempted to initiate intimacy, she refrained, considering my early wake-up time. Sensing her need for closeness, I hugged her warmly when she came home that night, but something in her had changed. Under Ethan's influence, she couldn't fully reciprocate my affection. The following week, things returned to normal with Ethan and, superficially, with our family. Yet it was a new kind of normal. While we laughed and joked together, Isabella seemed detached, unaware of the concerned looks I shot her way. Eventually, I reached my breaking point and pleaded with her to abandon the promotion, expressing my love and fear for our family. Sadly, I couldn't have chosen a worse day to pour out my feelings. Ethan had just hinted that he wanted to take their relationship to the next level. Isabella was preoccupied, torn between losing Ethan's ego-boosting compliments and dealing with my heartfelt plea. It was clear that if she had to choose, I would win, but she was desperate to avoid making that choice, relying on Ethan for validation and me for stability. Even after I fell silent, she stayed up late, devising a risk-free solution. By 2 a.m., she had a plan. The next night, she explained it to Ethan, emphasizing her commitment to me and her refusal to cheat. She proposed enticing me into a three-way with Ethan as the third participant, making it seem like a random choice. If it worked, she planned to find ways to spend time alone with Ethan later, with my approval. Ethan hesitated, but confident that once the barrier was breached, she'd be his, he agreed. He warned he wouldn't wait forever, and she, grateful for his consent, allowed him to kiss her properly for the first time. However, she stopped him when he tried to touch her breast, pushing his hand away and reiterating her commitment to fidelity. Isabella didn't seem anxious about discussing this with me. Our relationship had always been open, especially about our desires, and we had explored role-playing before. However, feeling too exhausted to bring it up that night, she chose to wait until I was asleep the next night before pleasuring herself, lost in fantasies about Ethan. She couldn't suppress a soft moan, her arousal intensifying until I shifted towards her. "This seems a bit unfair, doesn't it?" I remarked. "Why?" "What's unfair about it?" she asked, puzzled. "You lying there pleasuring yourself after you've been rejecting me for the past few months," I pointed out. Isabella was shocked. "Has it really been that long, sweetheart?" "Absolutely. Ever since you started chasing that promotion, you've either been too exhausted, too irritable, or simply brushed me off whenever I tried to initiate something, I explained. Feeling a twinge of guilt, Isabella saw this as an opportunity to finally talk about the issue that had been on her mind. She took a moment to justify to herself how her infatuation with Ethan was affecting our marriage, ready to open up. Isabella's POV. I was struggling to figure out how to start this sensitive conversation, so lost in my thoughts that I didn't even notice when my husband Lucas sighed and turned away again. The idea of suggesting a three-way after months without intimacy felt like a blow to Lucas' ego, insinuating he no longer satisfied me. No, I needed a safer approach. I decided to reconnect with Lucas first. Rolling towards him, I pulled him close, but he began snoring almost immediately after turning onto his back. I felt too embarrassed to continue my thoughts. I needed to release my pent-up desires. Before Ethan came into my life, everything seemed perfect in my marriage and my world. After 2 days of nothing happening, Ethan seemed a bit irritated with me. The next day, I kissed him again to prevent any criticism. This time, he behaved and didn't make any advances. But it left me feeling so aroused that I passionately kissed Lucas when I got home. I even caressed his groin while doing so. Lucas' eyes lit up, and we didn't wait for the kids to go to bed. As soon as dinner was over, we went to the small outdoor shed where Lucas had installed a jacuzzi, his way of keeping our sex life alive as the kids grew older. Once inside, Lucas eagerly initiated intimacy. When I joked about his impatience, Lucas explained that he didn't want to give me a chance to change my mind. Lucas performed as usual, but I only climaxed when I closed my eyes and remembered Ethan's bulge pressing against my leg earlier that day. The next morning, a Saturday, Lucas woke me up in a way I used to enjoy, his tongue exploring me intimately. While Lucas likely thought I used the pillow to stifle my bones, I, even with my eyes shut, struggled to imagine Lucas was Ethan. It was a pleasurable but confusing experience. That evening, I felt confident enough to bring up the sensitive topic with my husband. After praising his recent performance, I cautiously mentioned that things had started to feel routine, and I was fascinated by the idea of a three-way. Lucas, being open-minded, immediately suggested we role-play it. This exceeded my expectations. So we returned to the jacuzzi. After each encounter, we collapsed on the mattress, thoroughly exhausted. The revived intimacy with Lucas nearly made me abandon my plan. About a week and a half into what I considered Lucas' adjustment period, Ethan grew more impatient, and the compliments started to fade. I found myself needing to kiss him almost daily just to keep his interest. Eventually, even that wasn't enough, and I sensed Ethan pulling away again. 2 days after a lengthy session in our jacuzzi shed, I felt ready to bring up a sensitive topic with Lucas. I had been building up the courage to discuss our sexual adventures and what I envisioned for our future. However, before I could bring it up, Lucas started the conversation. "Sweetheart, the past few weeks have been amazing. I found it incredibly arousing to have our guests join us in our intimacy. How do you see this fitting into our role play?" Lucas asked, full of anticipation. I was shocked, realizing there had been a major misunderstanding. "What? You think I want a three-way with another woman?" I responded. "Be wildered." Lucas, just as confused, asked, "Isn't that what this has been leading up to?" I realized we hadn't communicated our desires clearly, causing this mix-up. "No, Lucas, my thoughts were on including another man," I clarified, seizing the moment for an honest conversation. "Oh," Lucas reacted, giving me a chance to be more explicit. "Listen, honey, I've been really excited these past few weeks. Is there any chance we could make my fantasy a reality with another man?" I proposed, hopeful but nervous. Lucas thought about my suggestion. "Well, honestly, I don't see that ending well for us. I thought we both liked the idea of including another woman. The thought of another man doesn't sit well with me," he admitted, clearly uncomfortable. "What if it's something I feel strongly about, Lucas?" I pressed, seeking his openness. Lucas considered my words. "I'd need time to think about it. The only way I might consider it is if we could also include another woman at a different time," he suggested, trying to find a compromise. I said, "No, the idea of you with another woman upsets me." Lucas asserted firmly, "Let's drop this idea. We can't include another guy either. It's off the table." The finality in Lucas's tone crushed my hopes for this particular fantasy. The next day, when I told Ethan about the conversation, he was clearly upset, accusing me of not trying hard enough and giving me the cold shoulder for the rest of the week. Frustrated and disappointed, I had to deal with the fallout of our failed negotiation and the tension it created. On Monday, Ethan asked for a private conversation with me after everyone else had left. He seemed genuinely saddened as he said he couldn't continue being around such a beautiful woman who wasn't available to him sexually. I was forced to choose between him and my husband, and I chose my husband. Despite the pain it caused Ethan, he respected my decision, kissed me goodbye, and asked me to remember him fondly. He understood our relationship had to go back to being professional and started to walk away. "Wait." Ethan stopped and turned back. "Give me another week, please." "What do you have in mind?" I asked. "I'm not sure. Just give me a week to come up with something," Ethan pleaded. With another kiss, we parted ways, leaving me to return to my distracted state over the weekend. Lucas POV. I couldn't help but notice Isabella's recent mood swings and newfound obsession with 3 ways. Another concern nagged at me. Why was her lipstick smudged when she came home late on Friday? It was time for some investigation. Isabella had the weekend to think things over, and by Monday she eagerly approached Ethan after work. His eyes lit up as she started explaining her plan, but he cut her off midway. Ethan raised a cautionary point. "You know, Isabella, he might expect something in return for this." Isabella, ever mindful of her limits, replied, "There are some concessions I'm willing to make, but I have clear boundaries I won't cross. We'll just have to see how things play out." Ethan, wanting to ensure they were on the same page, warned, "Just remember, if he doesn't agree, then I'm pulling out of our plans altogether." "I get it, Ethan. If that's the outcome, I'm ready to accept it," Isabella acknowledged. Ethan understood, offering himself as a practice subject if needed. With his implied approval, Isabella spent most of Tuesday and Wednesday at work devising her strategy. She decided that whatever she did, it must pose no risk to her marriage and family. She thought of it like a poker game, where she had won a $1,000 pot and didn't want to risk it. She wanted to lock it away in a safe, ensuring it was secure even from herself. This way she could keep playing, knowing she might win another $1,000. But even if she lost, she'd still have the first pot. On Wednesday evening, Ethan took her out to dinner to rehearse. After the main course, he told her to give it her best shot. "Well, Ethan, I've decided to go at him strong and fast tomorrow night. I'll start by expressing my deep love for him and how much I cherish our children. You know, mentioning their future milestones like graduations, weddings, and grandkids' christenings. Then I'll bring up our retirement plans." Ethan's mind began to drift. He noticed how women often led with emotional rhetoric, a tactic that might sway another woman but often missed the mark with men who leaned towards rationality over emotion. "Are you paying attention, Ethan?" Isabella's voice snapped him back. "Of course, Isabella," Ethan replied, refocusing. After that, Isabella continued, "I'll remind him that I offered him a chance to join in on harmless fun, which he declined. I'll tell him that he's left me with no choice but to seek affection elsewhere, starting with a rendezvous on Friday night. Before he can process this, he'll stress that it's purely physical, just a bit of emotional enjoyment. I apologize, Ethan. I might need to stretch the truth a bit there. If he truly loves me, hell allow it. I estimate I have about a 70-30 chance of him agreeing on the spot. What do you think?" Ethan privately estimated the odds to be much lower, but kept it to himself. He figured his chances of seducing Isabella were less than 50%, but the thrill of the pursuit was worth it. He thought he could enjoy it once without risk, but repeated encounters would increase the chance of being caught and losing his job for a sexual relationship with a subordinate. Why risk it more than once? He had been in similar situations and knew he had already enjoyed most of the thrill by helping Isabella. He thought he might get a bit more by increasing her chances of success. Ethan mentioned that if he were in Isabella's husband's shoes, he might have suggested an open relationship, but Isabella was against sharing her husband with anyone else. She said if her husband suggested such a thing, she would rather end their marriage. Ethan then suggested Isabella had a way to stop her husband from making any unwanted moves, by threatening divorce and the possibility of him not seeing the kids much if they split up. But Isabella didn't like using such threats, even as a bluff. Ethan tried to convince Isabella to stand up for herself, arguing that her husband was to blame for not agreeing to her suggestions. He held her hands, looked into her eyes, and told her she deserved to find happiness after years of putting her family first. Isabella started to think Ethan had a point, but made it clear everything depended on Lucas being okay with the plan. If she thought Lucas wasn't on board, she'd back out. Ethan assured Isabella it was a situation where they couldn't lose, though he doubted the reality of Isabella's hopes. As they waited for dessert, Isabella jotted down some thoughts for her plan. After they finished eating, Ethan walked her to her car, and they said goodnight with a kiss. This wrapped up their discussion on navigating their complicated situation, focusing on their desires and the boundaries they were willing to cross. When Ethan gently held her, she didn't resist. Instead, she moved closer to him. She could feel his reaction through his clothing, which almost overwhelmed her. Ethan briefly considered taking things further, but decided to keep things playful. "All right, love. I'll book us a room for Friday night, or can we go to your place?" "I've never seen it," Ethan said with curiosity and excitement. "No way," she replied with a laugh, the playful tone clear. "The walls are too thin and you'll be screaming too much, I can assure you of that." On trembling legs, Isabella went home to her family. She was more distracted than usual. At one point, she realized she was alone, and everyone had gone to bed. The next day, Isabella slept in and only woke up just in time to see the kids off. She reminded them that Lucas's parents were picking them up for a sleepover and made sure they had everything they needed. She had arranged the day off and called Ethan multiple times to keep her courage up. Isabella knew her biggest weakness was her inability to lie convincingly. She practiced saying no in front of the mirror, preparing for the inevitable question from Lucas. Did she already have someone in mind? She planned to say she intended to go out and allow herself to be seduced. Anything else would invite uncomfortable questions. Isabella convinced herself that by staying cool, calm, and collected, she could pull this off. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table waiting to confront Lucas, who was due any minute. It was Thursday night, 24 hours before the big event she was anticipating. The kids were at their grandparents', and Isabella felt ready, repeating to herself, "Stay firm, Isabella. You deserve this." Lucas walked into the house at 5:30 p.m., an hour and a half later than usual. He must have timed his arrival knowing Isabella had the day off. When he entered, he saw her at the kitchen table with a nearly empty bottle of wine in front of her. Isabella rarely drank more than one glass, so Lucas immediately sensed something serious was up. It wasn't just any special occasion. He knew this was a moment when Isabella might be more open and vulnerable. "Hi, Isabella. What are we celebrating? Did you get that promotion?" Lucas asked, trying to gauge the situation with a mix of curiosity and concern. "We aren't celebrating, Lucas, not yet. Please sit down. We need to talk." Isabella responded, her tone serious and inviting deeper conversation. Despite her liquid courage, Isabella's nerves were getting the better of her. Silently, she repeated her mantra, "Stay firm, Isabella. You deserve this." Lucas beat her to the punch. "I'm guessing this has something to do with your recent distractions. Maybe it's related to the fact that you've been distant from the family for the past 6 months, or the 5-month dry spell in the bedroom, except for those 2 good weeks. Let me guess, Isabella. You still love me. You see us attending our kids' milestones and enjoying retirement together, but because I didn't agree to your 3-way idea, you plan to cheat on me with your lover. Is it happening tonight or tomorrow?" His words hit Isabella hard. He had just summarized everything she had been planning to say. In a panic, she tried to stick to her rehearsed speech. "But I deserve this, Lucas. It would only be physical. Just a bit of fun to spice things up," she stammered. In a state of panic, Isabella continued, reciting parts of the script Ethan had helped her with. She warned Lucas against sleeping with other women, threatening divorce and loss of access to their children, along with financial consequences. Mid-sentence, she noticed a shift in Lucas's expression. It wasn't guilt or resignation, but rather intense and stormy. Confused, Isabella found herself confronted with questions about names. Lucas's insistence on knowing who was involved showed how serious he was. Caught off guard, Isabella hesitated before revealing Ethan's name, insisting he wasn't the type to do such things. Lucas's interrogation intensified. He accused her of seeing Ethan behind his back, citing her recent behavior as proof. Despite Isabella's protests, Lucas remained skeptical, questioning if Ethan had influenced her decisions and humiliated him. Isabella was in a tough spot, feeling both insulted and scared. The discussion had taken an unexpected turn, and she struggled to prove her loyalty. She explained that her late nights and weekends out were innocent, just conversations and dinners with Ethan. But Lucas didn't believe her, pointing to a time she came home looking disheveled, suggesting it was due to a sexual encounter. Desperate, Isabella raised her voice, insisting there had been no infidelity, only talking, dinners, and some kissing. She pleaded with him to believe she would never betray their marriage. Lucas, overwhelmed, covered his face with his hands. Isabella had never seen him cry, and it hit her hard. The realization that she could cause him such deep pain was horrifying. The thought of losing everything over a misunderstanding filled her with panic. In a last-ditch effort to salvage things, Isabella was ready to abandon all her plans with Ethan, believing it could repair the damage. But before she could say anything, Lucas concluded that her actions had irreparably damaged their marriage and family, expressing betrayal and grief. He accused her of threatening to separate him from their children. As Lucas walked out the door, his words carried a finality that paralyzed Isabella. By the time she gathered the courage to follow him, it was too late. Isabella's POV, Lucas, was nearly at his car, and I hadn't had the chance to offer my final solution. Close to his car, I tried again to assert my innocence. Lucas paused but didn't turn to face me. His response made it clear he viewed my actions as unforgivable. He equated my time away from the family, lying about my whereabouts, going to dinner with Ethan, and kissing him as forms of cheating. With a tone of resignation, Lucas declared the end of our relationship, leaving me to face the consequences of my choices. I dropped to my knees, too stunned and overwhelmed to hold myself up, and watched him drive away, too shocked to even cry. Stay firm. You can't lose. You deserve this. I kept repeating to myself, trying to remember my preparations for our confrontation. The idea of our marriage ending had only seemed like a distant threat until now. I had never imagined Lucas would actually consider it. For a little over an hour, I wallowed in self-pity. The realization that I might have irreparably damaged our relationship was too much to bear, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. Another worry weighed heavily on me. Lucas' parting words and demeanor had set off alarm bells. For the first time, I feared how my ultimatum had truly affected my husband, a man who had always been devoted to me and our family. I feared he might harm himself. Would he? In a divorce, he would likely lose custody of our children and a significant portion of his assets. We knew cases where ex-wives denied access to children, aided by biased court systems. Would Lucas consider harming himself? Damn, yes, panic set in. Lucas didn't answer his cell phone. I called his parents to check if he was with them, but he had left. They were perplexed. Lucas had only stayed briefly before leaving after hugging our 3 children. I hurriedly drove to every bar I could think of, searching for his car. I was so preoccupied that I ran out of gas and had to call my dad for help. Recognizing my distress, he drove me home. There, I broke down and confided in my parents that Lucas had left me. My mother's eyes reflected her pain, and my father's remarks made his opinion of Lucas clear. Eventually, my mother agreed it was best for me to return home and drop me off at my car. I went home and fell asleep on the couch in the early hours of the morning. Nightmares jolted me awake at 7 a.m. Before I could shake off the grogginess, panic set in again. I frantically checked my phone for messages, but found none. I dialed Lucas's cell, but it went straight to voicemail as if it was turned off or out of battery. His charger lay beside mine on the kitchen counter. I called his workplace and learned he hadn't shown up. I contacted the police explaining why my husband had left, but they offered no assistance. By then it was 8 a.m. I reached out to every friend in Lucas's address book, yet none had seen him. I spent the entire day driving to every place I could think of, returning home every couple of hours to check for Lucas' car, which never appeared. His cell remained unreachable. Reality briefly intruded when I received a message from Ethan. Hi, at room 7007, 6 p.m. The message sent shivers down my spine, but I suppressed my reaction. Lucas's parents called next, still unaware of his whereabouts. I asked them to care for the kids temporarily. Back at home, I collapsed on the couch, overwhelmed with sorrow. I must have dozed off again, waking abruptly at 3:30 a.m., consumed by despair. I tried to conjure Lucas's image but failed, feeling an irrational certainty that he was dead. I feared losing my sanity, but pushed the thought aside. With dread, I returned to my car, finding my cell on the passenger seat. There was one message from my eldest and 6 from Ethan. I listened to my child's message expressing longing for her mother, but ignored the others. Around 10 a.m., I scoured potential local suicide sites, searching for Lucas's car. Bridges, ravines, secluded areas, but found nothing. Desperate, I contacted Lucas's parents again, but they still had no updates. I reached out to all his friends once more. When I called Lucas's oldest friend, who happened to be a former boss, I sensed he wasn't entirely forthcoming. Suspecting something was wrong, I searched for his address and decided to drive by his house to check for Lucas's car. In an affluent neighborhood, I found the house but saw no sign of Lucas. As I drove away, my attention was caught by a distinctively marked Lexus parked 3 houses down. It belonged to Ethan. The car was parked outside another lavish residence among several others. Suddenly, the idea of seeking solace from Ethan, who was also my friend, appealed to me. Parking my car, I approached the front door. I could hear subdued revelry inside, indicating a Saturday afternoon gathering. Next to the door was a panel with a security keypad, doorbell, and intercom button. I pressed the button. When I arrived at Ethan's company, I was greeted by the general manager, Mr. Sterling. I asked to see Ethan. Mr. Sterling, recognizing me, invited me inside, but conscious of my messy appearance, I preferred to wait outside. Mr. Sterling agreed to fetch Ethan. Shortly after Ethan came out to meet me, he quickly ensured we were alone before embracing me, kissing me, and then holding me close against the wall. Overwhelmed by my emotions, I sought comfort in Ethan's arms, moving from a kiss to a tight hug. Ethan was eager to understand what had happened the night before, prompting me to share my distressing encounter with Lucas, who had accused me of infidelity and seemed to know about my plans with Ethan, leading to fears that Lucas might have done something drastic due to his disappearance. Our intense moment was abruptly interrupted by an angry woman bursting out, accusing Ethan of betrayal, and lamenting their move to escape similar issues, suggesting a history of problems. Acting on impulse, I stepped in to prevent any potential harm, positioning myself between Ethan and the irate woman. The enraged woman, seeing me as an easy target, swung around and delivered a powerful backhand that sent me crashing into the wall. The impact caused me to accidentally press the intercom button, and I let out a cry of pain. Stunned, I slumped to the ground while the furious woman continued her assault on Ethan. The chaos escalated until the company's boss intervened, gently but firmly restraining Ethan's wife and chastising her for the violent outburst. After briefly addressing the situation, the boss instructed Ethan and me to meet with him in his office on Monday at 9 a.m. With that, he led Ethan's wife back inside, leaving Ethan emotionally shattered. He rushed to his car and drove off, leaving me dazed and overwhelmed by the ordeal. Feeling utterly distraught, I managed to pull myself together and went home. I called my mom, who convinced my dad to pick me up and take me to their house. I spent the night crying and slept most of the next day, only to wake up and cry again. On Monday, the general manager of my company discussed the situation with the HR manager. They couldn't take action until they heard my side of the story, and they agreed not to fire Ethan until his wife decided what she wanted to do. The boss knew Ethan's wife had taken the kids and gone to her mother's house. They decided to give me until the end of the day tomorrow to contact them before considering ending my contract. The HR manager questioned whether they believed Ethan's claim that he and I had not been intimate, to which the boss responded that it was still considered a breach of trust. They lamented the complexities of human relationships, with the HR manager expressing frustration at people's inability to be content with what they have. By Monday evening, I felt well enough to call my in-laws to check on the children. I believed I could face seeing the kids, but I dreaded facing Lucas' parents, fearing they blame me for Lucas's disappearance. I planned to convince them to drop the children home without confronting me. However, my heart sank when Lucas's mother informed me that all 3 kids refused to see me and threatened to call the police if I showed up. Before I could respond, she abruptly ended the call. I woke up disoriented, lying on the kitchen floor, stiff and sore, realizing I had wet myself. After a long shower, I noticed the setting sun. It had been just after sunset when I made the call. Glancing at my phone, I saw it with 6 p.m. Tuesday. I had been out of it for nearly 24 hours. What had happened? Despite feeling fresher than I had in days, I was determined to regain control of my life. Though the possibility of Lucas's death threatened to overwhelm me, I pushed the thought aside, drawing strength from my children. I decided to visit my in-laws unannounced and bring the kids back home. Upon arriving at Lucas's parents' house, I was surprised to find my own parents' car parked there. As I pulled up, they emerged from the door, swiftly guiding me back to my car. I resisted, demanding to see my children. My father informed me they weren't there and instructed me to follow them home, which I reluctantly did. Back home, I asked about my children's whereabouts. My father reassured me that Lucas had the kids and was alive, indicating that they had just spoken with him. I then asked where Lucas was, prompting my parents to exchange uncomfortable glances before admitting that he had taken the kids to meet someone. My mother, impatient and disappointed, expressed her disapproval of my actions and sided with Lucas's version of events over mine. Feeling ashamed, I remained silent as my mother continued. She mentioned Lucas' encounter with an old friend named Adeline Harper, which caused me great concern. I knew that Lucas and Adeline had separated when she went to a business college far from our hometown, and Adeline's recent divorce only heightened my fears. My parents revealed that Lucas had taken the kids to meet her, further deepening my sense of dread. When Adeline saw the state Lucas was in, she took him to her home, where he had been staying since then. My parents further informed me that Lucas had taken the kids to meet Adeline and her children to see if they got along. They assured me that nothing had happened between Lucas and Adeline before this, but now they seemed to be getting along well. Feeling outraged, I insisted that Lucas had to give me another chance. However, my parents recounted Lucas's perspective, stating he felt crushed by my lies about working late while seeing another man. My father stressed that cheating wasn't just physical. It was also about deceit and emotional betrayal. He pointed out the suspicious signs Lucas had noticed, like my smeared lipstick, and the notes detailing plans to manipulate him. I tried to defend myself, saying I didn't mean to threaten Lucas, but my father's disappointment was palpable. He highlighted how my actions had hurt Lucas and the entire family. I felt silent, staring at the table as my parents shook their heads in disapproval. I began to grasp the full extent of the lies, the deceit, and the emotional gap that had grown between Lucas and me over the past 6 months. It hit me that my marriage might truly be beyond repair. After letting me sit with my thoughts for a while, my mother finally spoke up. "How are the kids and I going to survive without Lucas?" I asked, my voice laced with worry. My parents exchanged a grave look before my father nodded at my mother to speak. "Isabella, Lucas has been struggling with this decision for the past 5 days. He's been wondering if the children would be better off with you or him, but because of the threats you made, he feels he can't risk leaving them with you," she said, glancing at my father for support. "We have to be honest with you, Isabella. We share his concerns," my father added. "If we support you, we might lose access to our grandchildren." I was stunned, needing a moment to process their words. Frustration boiled inside me, and I couldn't help but feel betrayed. "So you're siding with him?" I accused. "You brought this on yourself, Isabella," my father replied firmly. "But I refuse to back down. I'll fight you all. The courts usually favor the mother in custody battles. He can't prove I cheated because I didn't." "Isabella, it's not about proof," my mother interjected. "Lucas wants out of the marriage. The children are old enough to have a say in court, and if they were asked tonight, you wouldn't stand a chance. If you lose, you could lose custody for good." Her words hit me hard, making me realize the precariousness of my situation. Feeling my last hope slip away, I ran to my car and sped off. 2 weeks later, an interim court order was issued. It favored Lucas due to his stable job, strong bond with the kids. 6-month role as their primary caregiver and stable living situation. The children's preferences were also taken into account, strengthening his case for custody. On the other hand, I was financially insecure, unemployed, and unable to afford the house buyout. The judge's decision was clear. As the mandatory 12-month separation period ended and the divorce was finalized, I started to regain my sense of self. My parents forgave me, and I focused on being a devoted mother during my visits with the kids. I even agreed to attend an engagement wake with Lucas and his new fiancée. When I received the final divorce papers, I got a harsh email from Ethan, blaming me for his divorce and job loss. Reflecting on everything, I realized my marriage failed because of my own greed and dissatisfaction. The only lingering issue was the recurring nightmares, which gradually decreased from nightly to once or twice a week.